Good morning. On this Memorial Day weekend, we will be laying wreaths not only for our servicemen who have fallen in battle, but for the 19 students and 2 teachers killed Tuesday in Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, and those in Buffalo, New York, both by 18-year-old males and both by AR-15 style rifles legally bought. Waiting to act was the wrong decision. Yeah, well, waiting to act also is what the whole country has been doing in terms of passing legislation. So I think that also is the wrong decision. So anyway, the scripture for today is Colossians 1:11. May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, and for all endurance and patience with joy. The theme of today is abuse of power, as we are reminded of the 18-year-old and the anonymous saying, power which can be abused will be abused. Another area of concern is our electrical power. We are reminded of an ancient saying, if it weren't for electricity, we'd all be watching television by candlelight.
Or not watching television.
And that might not be so bad.
Our morning grace for those eating breakfast now or those about to join us have already digested it is, gracious God, in the midst of destruction and abuse of your creation, we can see the wonders of your world and the intricacies of working out your purpose. Help us to seek the truth and understanding the food we are offered and the air we breathe. Bless our speaker this morning and the help we have obtained to make this presentation possible, and for all of those who have attended. We ask it in his name. Amen.
Amen.
Our speaker this morning is the executive director of the new Energy Economy. Among her many activities as lawyer, presenter in both state and federal courts, she has relentlessly kept in mind the good of those in our great state. Her energy appears boundless as she works to keep our energy intact. Today, she will share her thoughts on the Avangrid PNM merger in light of the Albuquerque Journal's, quote, reporting that PNM Avangrid merger is alive and kicking. Help me welcome the very special Mariel Nanasi.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I think I'll just say that, when we started, we were talking about the murders, and I just want to say that weighs heavily on our hearts. But one of the things that I find is that the thing that motivates me, and it's true, I don't have boundless energy. If I had boundless energy, I would have been here on time. But I have a lot of energy. And one of the things is that is to take the pain and the frustration and the anguish and the sorrow that I have in my heart and try to turn it, to experience it, and then turn it into energy, positive energy. And the way that I do that is right now, specifically, is in our work in New Energy Economies work around trying to stop the evil and the destruction and the violence. And I say that with intention, and I mean that because we saw some raw evil, and we don't even have an idea about it. We can just imagine it. But still, I was crying watching TV when we see people being interviewed and who were suffering, who lost children. And this kind of evil that I'm trying to stop is the violence of poverty. It's the violence of some people essentially stealing from others, and stealing from life itself, because we know that we can't depend on and rely on fossil fuels, and shouldn't have been for the last many years, but certainly in the last 10 or 20 years we've known. And this company in particular, because that's the one that I'm closest to and know, is PNM, Public Service Company of New Mexico. And I take it so seriously, because I think that they're not only creating and just really destroying the earth by the digging up of oil and gas and coal and uranium and extracting it, but it's not only extracting it from the ground and fueling fueling climate change, but also the fires that we're seeing right now, that has a lot of death and destruction associated with it. And that's really close to home. And tomorrow I'm going to go up with my husband to Mora and see for myself, because I feel like I gotta see it myself. And we have talked for years about what we see in the future of what is going to be the violence of climate change, and the violence of extreme poverty. And of course, they're linked in our society. And we just lost 300,000 acres of land in days. We thought, oh, it's going to be 50 years and it's going to be from the bark beetle, and I've learned about the bark beetle and really what it does, and eating up the trees and making but it's really about the drought, and it's about warmer temperatures, and it's about I know you want me to talk about Avangrid and PNM merger, and I'll get there in really 1 second.
It's okay. Keep going.
But I just feel like that is what has driven me to do what I do. And the thing is about what we thought of as, usually we think of ourselves getting older or different change, and it happening gradually, because that's our natural experience, right? That's our natural experience. But it happens over a long period of time. Actually, it doesn't happen in a day. But these lands, these beautiful places that thousands have called home, that's gone in a day. And so we have to think about that kind of violence. And then there's the other kind of violence, which is that these senior management and energy companies, and then their senior management, and then their shareholders are making money off of this, off of this whole system, and then off of the poverty of the poorest people in New Mexico. And so when they do nefarious things to raise rates, and it's not because they need it or because they've done good, it's in spite of that. And it's because we have a system that hasn't been working. It's the opposite. So that's the context. And so we laid a context of horrific violence in mass shootings, but we know what to do. And we kind of know what to do, frankly, in this area as well. We know we have to switch to oil and gas.
May I make a quick comment on that? I think the proper word for what you just described is called greed. I mean, I just read a post on Facebook 2 or 3 days ago. The oil companies in the United States posted a $9.1 billion profit, which was something like, 150% or one humongous percentage increase over 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, that is greed. I mean, everybody blames Biden, but my God, I mean, put the blame where it belongs. And, you talked about the hatred in my lifetime. And in context, that's 80 years. I have never seen the level of racism in the acts that have been here. And I think that this rates, as you were talking about on the poverty level, that's pure racism.
It is.
I mean, racism coupled with greed, my God, what a terrible combination.
Exactly. And so now I'll move into, it's like, thank you for that almost perfect interruption. And I want to say it wasn't really an interruption. It was because there's few of us and we should just dialogue. But that's exactly right. So I just want to say PNM right now, when somebody doesn't pay their bill, PNM sends them a disconnect notice. And on average, and this is pre-COVID, the 3 years before COVID, PNM sent 350,000 disconnect notices.
Oh my God.
Now let's say, I don't know, 50,000 of them were second homeowners or third homeowners. It's possible, but the rest of them are not. I don't even think that there's that many of those of the former category. And what that means is people like you and me, but not us, received more than one disconnect notice. And, they come in these big orange or reddish colored envelopes. And it's a warning. And it's a warning that the people who are in receipt of them will no longer have access to electricity. And the thing about that is that PNM only has 530,000 customers, and about 470 of them, 470,000 are residential ratepayers. So if you think about it, and there's 350,000 disconnect notices, and if lots of people like you and me don't get them, then that means some people get multiple disconnect notices. And of that, the average is 20,000 of them are actually disconnected, no longer have access to electricity at all. Now, if it was just TV, or I can't even say computer, because during COVID, which it doubled, all those figures doubled. During COVID, some people were studying online. I was doing my business online. We literally closed New Energy Economy because nobody was there. And so I thought we should save money and not pay for a office that nobody was in. So we closed our office. It was just temporary because we opened it a year and a half later, and we moved to a different place. But in the meantime, that's a kind of violence. It's a kind of violence because if you don't have electricity, how are you going to go to school? If some people literally need a dialysis machine to survive. There are real needs for electricity, and some people get their electricity from heat. And so people were disconnected. Luckily, New Energy Economy, with some other folks, worked hard at the PRC and brought a number of people together and testified for public comment before the PRC and got a moratorium that lasted about a year and a half. So that was very important. And that's a long intro to saying that Avangrid is worse. So Avangrid just was fined, and I mean just like 2 weeks ago, $3 million for going a step further. It's not bad enough to send threatening disconnect notices and actually disconnect people. But what it does, and what it did during COVID, and this is for which it got a fine, is garnished people's wages. And why is that so bad? Because it's not bad enough that you get your your disconnect notices, but you have a job, it's probably in all likelihood, a low wage job.
Mm.
And then your wages are garnished because you haven't paid a bill. So I don't even think that PNM does that. And what that amounts to is, economic marginalization of even a further kind. Because if you ever have the opportunity to want to, to actually have enough money to put down on a condo or a house, you're not going to be able to do that if your wages are garnished. And maybe even the same thing for a car. Sure, probably you'll be able to get a car, but then it's at a higher interest rate to borrow. So these are the kinds of things that Avangrid does, a step worse than PNM. And, the Avangrid Iberdrola, and I'll get to that in a second, merger with PNM failed because they could not overcome their own track record of outages and unreliability, of diminished service quality, of more than $65 million in penalties and violations, and failure to abide by this commission's rules and law and the state law, but also the laws in Maine, New York, and Connecticut. And then there's this other thing, and this is one of the things that the PRC found, that the risk of subsidization, of non-utility activities, meaning that they were going to, and was my experience, under cross-examination, Avangrid was asked, why do you want to come and own PNM and run PNM? And they said, literally, we want to use it as a beachhead. And I looked up that military term to understand really what it is. And it's a place from which you attack. That was the language that was used. And then try and conquer. And he said, we want to use PNM as a beachhead and then consolidate was the word he used, all the renewables for them, not for us, not for New Mexicans, but for Avangrid and Iberdrola, and then sell it wherever they want. So to the West or to Mexico, and for their benefit, and essentially further extract, just like what we were talking about, further extract, maybe this time using solar and wind and storage or more of it. But they didn't put aside hydrogen, they didn't put aside nuclear, and they didn't put aside gas. Well, frankly, everybody's out of coal now. It is the most uneconomic form of energy. So for them to just say, well, we're not giving up coal, that's this much better than PNM. And as we said before, their other practices are worse, including the history of unreliability and outages, and their history of going further than disconnections, but to garnishing people's wages. And this is what might be the most surprising of all, is while they have a clever and lovely little logo of 3 leaves, they have less solar in their portfolio than PNM does. And when they were asked, well, PNM is having trouble integrating all the solar that wants to get on the grid from rooftop solar and community solar. So there was the question was, what are you going to come here and do about that? And the answer was, well, we'd be flying in the dark because we haven't figured that out either. Well, if they're supposed to be coming here with all their money, they were supposed to be coming here with all their experience, but they didn't come here with all their experience. And what they came here was bulging pockets, just like what you said when, before about the oil companies. Iberdrola is coming here with bulging pockets, with literally money falling out of it and giving it away, giving pennies away or dollars away so that they could make millions. And that's what they've done successfully in all the other places that they've been, is to use the money that they have in order to gain access and control and domination. And then for them to essentially steal. I mean, that's what you're talking about when you're talking about greed, right? You're talking about stealing from the people. And that's what I think that they would do. And so we were opposed to that merger, and we won. And we won against all odds. And we won, and there's so much more to talk about Avangrid's track record. But because unreliability and outages are the number one thing that you gotta do that if you're going to be an electric company. That's your number one task. But they couldn't even do that. They have the most outages and the most blackouts and brownouts of any utility of its size in the US. In the US, this is not my numbers. This is the numbers of the Energy Information Agency. So we didn't want them. We didn't think that they were qualified, and we won. And now they have their case on appeal. And, you know, is it a great PR strategy that they're alive and kicking? They're alive and kicking. But is it a great PR strategy that they are portending or pretending, both, that they want to, that they're here and that they're going to be an entity to be reckoned with? It's a great PR strategy. I don't know if it'll work. They filed a brief in the Supreme Court, which I have to answer in 15 days. And their brief reads like this. This is their number one issue, by the way. I mean, it's going to sound crazy, but it's their number one issue. But this is the kind of thing. Their number one issue is all that evidence of the $65 million of unreliability and penalties and violations and fines should not have been admitted. And it shouldn't have been admitted because we're really good. And instead of looking at that, you should look at all the benefits that we're giving, we're promising New Mexicans. And one of the things that the commission said when they ruled against Avangrid is that they said, what we know can't overcome the promises. And it's like, and I think that my brief is going to start with, when you go for a job, they want to know what they want to see, your resume and talk to your references. When you go and you rent an apartment, the landlord wants to see where you've rented before and what's your track record there. And, you know, when you do anything of any major import, people do a background check, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And that's responsible. That's called due diligence. That's called reasonable review. And here they said, don't look at it. And I put my hands over my eyes, because that's the way this company operates. They say, don't look at us. Don't dig, which I did a lot of digging. Don't research. Just be happy with the money. And that's what we got back to. The money that I'm going to spread around, and relatively little money that I'm going to spread around. I just will tell you that in the merger deal itself, 3 PNM senior executives were going to get more money than all 470,000 of us residential ratepayers. So in the deal, the PNM executives were going to make 29 million, and all 570,000 of us were going to make 26 million of the money, and we were going to get ours over a 3-year period every month, which came out to $1.64 a month. So for $1.64 a month, even those poor people would say, take a hike. And the other thing that the commission said, besides, hey, you're asking us to choose between a bad record, a known record, and promises. The other thing that they said was, we can hardly keep up with our current agency's issues. Do you want to throw at us policing all your affiliates? And I said something before. I said that one of the reasons it was rejected, the merger was rejected, is the risk of subsidization of non-utility activities. And, you know, that's like a mouthful, and it's also sort of like, what does that mean? And what that means is, and it's not an issue really for PNM, but it was a brilliant issue to have as a requirement that had to be addressed. And it was prescient because it was written a long time ago that that was one of the questions that had to be troubled with when we had to brief whether they should come or not. And what does it mean? It means that, is this company going to create so many baby offshoots or other utilities or other companies? And is the commission in a position to, and the word that the commissioner used was police those other activities, those other baby companies that they were promising to spin off? And why? Because they wanted to create other utilities so that they could create that beachhead with PNM and then have those other utilities that would sell electricity and other services all over the West, including and South, including Mexico, and consolidate the renewable energy market, which is essentially to enlarge or exponentially enlarge the monopoly. And we don't need any of these monopolies anymore. I mean, it was an idea. Maybe it was good 100 and something years ago, but it no longer serves, because we can have safer, more resilient, cheaper, decentralized renewable energy plus storage. And, you know, I think that would be less at risk and more resilient with that kind of system than having the old model, really just sort of taking the old model that has failed us and you know, putting it on steroids. Essentially, that's what Avangrid is. And so we are opposing that in the New Mexico Supreme Court. And I think one of the questions that was posed to me was, what's going to happen? So there's a couple of things. We won in front of the PRC. I don't know if any of you out there have read the scathing, unbelievably influential and powerful 200-page recommended decision by the hearing examiner, the chief hearing examiner, mind you, but it was extraordinarily powerful and strong, and gave many reasons, some of which I've touched on here, but went into great detail under each category: unreliability, outages, penalties and violations, etc. Mismanagement, which was also another whole big thing. Anyway, lots of other things. And they said we shouldn't have them here. That is on appeal. So PNM and Avangrid have written their appeal, their brief. As I said, ours is due in June. they're going to write a reply. But one of the things that's coming out of Wall Street is if the Supreme Court doesn't respond in what they say a timely fashion, that they will withdraw their appeal and then file a new merger application in front of the new PRC, which is a whole nother problem, which is that PNM and some of the corporate environmental groups formed a PAC. And the PAC was to, that's a political action committee. And the PAC was to remove the elected commission and make it a governor appointed body. I'm not going to go into that too much because it happened. And it's unfortunate that Democrats are taking away people's right to vote in this time when they're supposedly claiming that Republicans are taking our right to vote away, which it is, which they are. But now Democrats have gotten in on the scene. And so they're taking our right to vote for PRC. And Michelle Lujan Grisham has been really pretty terrible in the energy field. She's given oil and gas a pass. She's given utilities a pass. She gave them the Energy Transition Act, which I believe is a big bailout. And that's something that they got this huge bailout of $361 million to close San Juan. And, excuse me, and they're and PNM's not even following that. They're asking or their plan is to get $150 million more from ratepayers, which all of us got together, even ETA proponents, and pushed back on. That's what the hearing that I had this week. And hopefully we'll win within a month, probably. So they're going to appeal. They're hoping to withdraw their appeal in time for when the new commissioners appointed by Michelle Lujan Grisham sit. And they think that they'll apply then and just rubber stamp it. What I have to say is they have to deal with new energy economy. First of all, we would oppose usually a motion to withdraw an appeal is granted because the courts are like, yes, please go. We got plenty on our plates. But I think that we would oppose it and expose their scheme, which is to actually do an end run around the legal process, which is the way that Avangrid works, which is one of the problems in this case, is to try to create special legal circumstances for them, which is what, because they have so much money and they're going to bring so much economic activity. They might bring some economic activity to New Mexico, except that it's going to all be about them. So I don't know if it's going to be as, easy as they say. I don't know if they're welcome on a red carpet because of all the things that they've done. And I'm a fighter. And they got to deal with my resistance. So go ahead, please.
So when a student applies to college, one gives all your credentials and everything. But if your father happens to be an alumni and donates a lot of money to the college, your chances of getting in very often are higher. Mm-hmm. And Avangrid acting like, oh, they are
Big Daddy
in New Mexico and they're spreading money around, reminds me of that. And
can I use that?
Sure.
Yeah, I just one of the questions I have is why couldn't PNM, because I think they have a pretty good profit on their income statement.
It was 155 million last year.
Yeah, no. Why couldn't they build the renewable energy part? I mean,
It's
the fact that the 3 PNM executives are going to make so much money if that comes in, they would have had to been incompetent to not be able to capitalize on the upcoming economy, which is not carbon-based economy. And that to me is the biggest indictment against this whole thing, is you don't, yeah, I understand their argument, they needed to bring in the expertise, but from what I could gather about Avangrid back in the Northeast, there wasn't any competency there either.
exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
and if you,
And you know
and-
what? Also, what they did there, just so you know, because that's literally what I mean, I've never done this in the Supreme in the PRC before, but I am going to use it now in the Supreme Court. They literally bulldozed a pristine forest
Mhm.
to create transmission lines, and I'm not sure if that project is still up operating. What they first did is just so similar, is they came here, they went there, and 25 out of the 27 little towns along the transmission line that they wanted to build, which was not going to be a benefit for Maine, but it was going to be a benefit for Avangrid and Iberdrola. They gave each one of those communities a little bit of money, a little spread here, a little spread there. And initially, all of those 25 communities said, sure, you're going to bring jobs and economic development. Yeah, let's have you. And every single one changed their mind. Every single community. And then every community along the corridor opposed Avangrid and Iberdrola for this transmission line. And, you know, transmission lines are the number one reason for the California fires. Let's just be
Right.
honest. And there are other ways. I mean, I was just reading about it yesterday, that to prevent those wildfires with poles that don't catch on fire. There's all sorts of amazing GIS technology that can track them all and see when there's too much brush, or all sorts of very cool new technology to monitor it. And, you know, Avangrid's not invested in that. As a matter of fact, Avangrid, one of the complaints in New York, upstate New York, 282 pages worth of pole violations. Now you think, how sexy is that, right? First of all, it was in 6-point font, these 282 pages. So with thousands and thousands of pole violations. And we cross-examined the CEO, the then CEO of Avangrid about it. And he was like, that's the other thing. I just will tell you, like, everything is somebody else's problem. Oh, that those polls and violations, that was another third party that didn't, you know, put something on it correctly. And I said, well, what about all these outages that you have and how long it took you to get the electricity back up? I mean, in some instances, 10 days, right? They said, oh, well, that was the worst climate storm in the Northeast. Well, that's your business, right? You know, that's your business. It's not like I could say, oh, that judge was bad. I could say that once. I could say that judge was nuts, right? But I couldn't say that about every judge. If I said that about every judge, oh, this one was nuts, that one was this one was the other thing. And that's why I lost all those times. Nobody would ever get, you know, nobody would ever invest in new energy economy, and I would be out of a job, and they should be out of a job, except for what they do affects here hundreds of thousands of people and all across the The East, it's millions of people. And the other thing is, I'll just end because I know I don't want to keep you over, but
Oh,
the
there's
other
no
thing,
problem. It's just the four of us.
okay, well, what the, I forgot what I was going to say to you. What was I just saying? Yeah,
There's somebody else's problem.
somebody
The
else's
last-
problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember. It's
Yeah,
gone.
but the thing I would like to ask you, taking PNM's comment that they didn't have the expertise, any other corporation that I'm aware of who wants to expand into another field, if they don't have the expertise, they hire it. I mean, to me, that just reinforces the incompetency of the executives at PNM. Can that sort of logic be used to combat some of this behind the scenes sellout by PNM? I mean, there's got to be somebody else in the renewable energy arena that could have been hired to have done this without doing a merger.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, if you look at some of the things that RETA is doing, that's the Renewable Energy Transmission Association. They built a transmission line, the Western Spirit line, and then sold it to PNM. They did. RETA did, with Pattern Energy, and so, yeah, I think that there's competence there. I think that when there's a will, there's a way. And I think you're exactly right. It's not like there's not enough engineers out there or and people who are adept at solar and battery storage. There are. It's that PNM, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the last 4 or 5 years, they haven't really, actually, they said that they were going to, but they haven't added any major solar or storage and no wind, which is the cheapest, energy to their system. And so this is, they've been laggard, and they and they're more into PR than they are into actually creating the next system. And it's one of the reasons why I believe that that we should do it, that we should instead focus our energy and our interest on public power. I think end with these two thoughts, which is one of the best things about solar and storage is that it can be decentralized. And what if Santa Fe, for instance, was owning and or producing their own, so either they would buy it straight out or they would partner with another company or 2 or 5 to create essentially microgrids all around the city to power the homes in the city. And they would have to probably be a city county adventure, but we already do that with Buckman, so we've proven that. So why can't we do that with electricity? And then the money would stay locally. And so even if we had the same bills that we have now, first of all, we could have rate stability, but then the money would go back into the city of Santa Fe and the county of Santa Fe. And then that money could be repurposed back into other needs that residents of Santa Fe want, as opposed to right now, as I told you before, the money literally is extracted like the resources from the ground. The money is extracted from the poorest people and it's shipped out to Wall Street. At least it's Wall Street. With Avangrid and Iberdrola, it would literally leave the country. It would go to Spain. And then on a statewide level, we could have a grid. And if the export potential is as good as what I believe it would be, because not only are we ultimately going to have to create a 100% renewable energy electric grid, but we're going to have to bump up the electric needs, and that is for transportation and for housing. And we'll need to have that, provided by all 100% electricity, 100% renewable electricity as well. And so there is an opportunity to sell to the West and maybe to Mexico, but shouldn't that be to benefit New Mexicans, not an out of country, out of state and out of country, corporation that has really, full circle of this conversation, has greed and financial interests. And I'll just end with, in Maine, when there was and this is literally one of the specific things that they're complaining about in the Supreme Court, they're saying that the PRC should not have admitted into evidence, and they call it hearsay, a report that was done. It was about 100-page report investigation into Avangrid and that utility there, which is called Central Maine Power. And they said one of the number one findings that they made was they were more interested in creating quarter profits and making their investors happy than providing reliable electricity. And that's sort of a number one thing that culminates into, if there had to be one sentence about Avangrid and Iberdrola, that is their emphasis. And that's not what we need. We have a different ethic in New Mexico, and also they have to provide. I mean, why would we allow a company to come to New Mexico who can't provide basic performance and customer service needs, respond to basic customer needs? And so that's why we're opposing them. That's why we hope we'll win in the Supreme Court. And if they haven't rigged that, we will win in the Supreme Court. And maybe it'll be over, or maybe it'll be some kind of plan like they have, which is to come back again under a different PRC, but we'll be there to oppose that as well. So thank you for having me.
Well, yeah, but before you go, I have a couple comments and questions. Obviously,
just to say, Cece, I have to go, and I want to thank Mariel and everyone who has attended. You certainly are free to continue, but I have to leave at this point.
I will, and then I will enter the recording. So if you want to listen to the comments later, you're more than welcome.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Okay, I'll do that.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, goodbye. Thanks again, Mariel.
Yeah,
Nice seeing you.
I mean, what I'm seeing from PNM and Avangrid is what I call a disease of corporate management. It's not about the long term, it's about the short term benefits to the stockholders, and the consumer be damned. And that is a philosophy that's permeating most of our corporate structure here in the United States. And I think that is coming from the increase by the, I'm going to say the federal administration, by allowing basically the wholesale consolidation, merger of like industries. I mean, take the banking industry. The money that's available to consumers is being controlled by large banks who have no headquarters in New Mexico that I'm aware of. Most of them are concentrated, it appears to be, in North Carolina. There's been this spate of mergers that are so anti-competition. It just blows my mind. And that's when I see what PNM and Avangrid are doing, it is nothing more than a more perverse application of that type of philosophy. It's
Mhm.
either to reward the board of directors who elect the CEO and president or whatever it is, and assuade the stockholders because that's who vote to allow them to stay. It's just this vicious circle. So that would be one of my comments. It'd be one of the reasons why I would personally oppose this merger. I don't
Yeah.
see any good outcome. I would like to see the management of PNM in particular, and probably even Avangrid, even though they're not, but I mean, they're here, somehow replace them
Yeah.
because they are so grossly incompetent. It just makes me shake my head. And the last question I'd like to ask you, you talked about a solar grid. When I look at what the current administration in New Mexico did to basically look the other way for the oil industry and sometimes, financially support them, I think of something that I think Bill Clinton said, is why can't we put solar? How many houses, residential places in New Mexico could we put maybe not a fully required amount of solar on the rooftop? I mean, I would think that we could solarize a lot of this state just by taking that money and rerouting it to the solar industry in New Mexico.
Yep.
I mean, that's
Exactly. I mean, I think of big ideas of like, what if we solarized every public school? What if we solarized every library? What if we solarized every hospital? Like these should be our focus first.
right.
And I think it could be done for probably, like what are the $9 billion of profits one quarter for oil and gas. We could probably do most of, well, certainly all of New Mexico for that. But I mean, the other thing is that everything is so wrong. Not everything, but a lot is exactly opposite that it should be. So if we had more conservation, that alone could address, but you see, the whole system has been working towards waste and excess. And so when you have that kind of system,
Right.
instead of a conservation mind, right, which is like, and what does it really brings us pleasure? What was the number one thing that people said in COVID brought them grace and peace? Nature, right? Nature. And yet it's the thing that we're abusing the most. And yet that's our only home. And so it's just that kind of thing where we have to turn the whole system on its head. And
Right.
I do believe that we could, if we had a more life affirming, not the pro-life thing, but a real life affirming kind of approach. And I do think that we could solarize. I mean, that's one of the reasons why New Energy Economy solarizes homeless shelters and all sorts of community centers and fire stations, because that's what we want to see in the world.
Yeah, I mean, those are basically government owned or government, where you can go and say, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to ask or anything. And I happen to have solar on my house because I believe in the future of renewable, and solar happens to be one of the, what I call, less obtrusive and clean renewable energy that I can see. So I'm a great fan of that. My wife and I just drove back from Florida, and I hope I'm not taking up your time by bringing up this stuff, but I was surprised at the number of solar farms I saw along I-10 through the south. I mean, I'm not talking about, a solar grid like you see next to the HEC building in Santa Fe, which may be, I'm guessing, less than 100 grids. I'm talking about ones that stretched a mile, and I go down to, and we drove along I-40 into Albuquerque. And I pointed out to my wife the big solar farm that's next, I believe it's Edgewood or Moriarty, I forget which one it is. And I'm sure the state didn't fund that, the local citizens did. And my guess is they are very happy with that situation. And it's somehow, I think we need to.
That's why, well, that's one of the things is that's why PNM hasn't moved, is because of, satisfaction. It's like when solar, when you have the solar panels, they work and they last for 20 to 40 years.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a great solution for PNM's bottom line, because they want to have things that are big and break and pollute and whatever and have to fix. And you never hear of a solar spill. You know what I mean? I mean, the problem is that it works and they can't keep making money off of it. And that's why they haven't moved towards it. It's not because they have an ideological thing against solar and wind. It's because they can't make as much money off of solar and wind as they can off of coal and gas and nuclear.
Yeah.
Nuclear is the most expensive. So that's one of the issues, which, by the way, the Palo Verde is going to close. But I think that is exactly right. That's what it's all about. It's about their ability to make money. And it's not about if solar and wind can't work. It works.
Right. No, we know it works.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to my aggravation against corporate leadership in America, it used to be that corporations had a long-term plan. It may be 10 years or something like that. But a 10-year plan in corporate America today is 10 one-year plans, so they can maximize their profit for 1 year and pay off their stockholders, and then they can raise a little income. It's that snowball effect that I think is disastrous in this country. We're not planning long term. If we were, we wouldn't be discussing oil.
That's right.
We wouldn't. Monopolies are only interested in what the bottom line is going to look like this year, and they can give $1 million bonuses to their executives. Oh, said what?
$1 million. The CEO of PNM makes $9 million a year.
I know. It's sickening.
It's sickening.
We can hardly pay our school teachers.
I know.
Yeah.
Jane, what do you have to say?
Well, I have a feeling that our natural resources should not be privately owned. I think they should be owned by all the people. And the people that we elect to office are the top managers, but they hire people to run the businesses, pay them well, but they don't need to be paid more than it costs to live a pretty high life. We should have, I actually think we should have a maximum amount of money that people should earn. I think that every human being that's born has a right to a decent life, and we should be putting our resources available for everybody. Nobody should have to worry about whether they're going to have enough water to drink, whether they're going to have enough to keep them warm or cool or whatever. And put our money into the things that build a
Matter.
wonderful society, not one where we've got more and more poverty and more illness.
Well,
And face the fact that our earth is not the same one. I'm going to be 91 next week, and I can tell you, I'm not living on the same earth that I lived on when I was born. Everything has changed, except the way we do things. And ever since the Roosevelt administration, there's been more and more of an effort for the wealthiest to gain more and more control of our resources and our wealth. And it's reached a point where it's very, very difficult now to wrench ourselves away from that system.
Yeah.
But that's what I see. And now that I have 3 great granddaughters, I would like to have a better future looking ahead for them. So as long as I can still breathe and talk on this planet, I'm going to do that.
yeah. No,
Beautiful vision.
Since I
Yeah.
moved from New Mexico, I'm not part of your organization anymore, but I sure have enjoyed the contacts I've had with you in the past.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just bless you for the work you're doing. You're on the right track.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
yeah, to reinforce what Jane just said. I used to be a registered Republican up until Trump ran. And I so could not stand that man so badly that I changed to independent. But as I tell people, the Republican Party I see in this country today is much closer to the Nazi Party I knew in Germany in 1939 than any Republican regime I knew throughout my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I'm very fearful of what's going to happen in midterms and next year. Because I mentioned about Biden being blamed for high oil prices. When you look at at the bottom, at the profit that the oil companies had. But I remember what a colonel I served. For those who don't know, I'm a retired Army major, and I served with a veterinarian corps colonel in Alaska sometime 1974, 75. And his comment about the proposed oil pipeline in Alaska was that not only was it something against the environment and for the bottom line of the corporations, but he said, petroleum is too important to burn it as an energy source. Because so many of our pharmaceuticals are petroleum based. I mean, good pharmaceuticals, immunizations and stuff like that. What are we going to do for that when the spigot turns dry? How are we going to improve the health of our population if we can't provide those sorts of pharmaceutical products that are necessary? Now, I say that when I look at the bottom lines of the pharmaceutical companies that came out with the COVID vaccines. Thank God they did that, but at what price did it come? And I'm very worried about the lack of urgency that our country has towards solving the climate change.
Mhm.
Because as I tell people, there were certain safety things we did while I was stationed in Alaska. You never left home without a full tank of gas. You made sure you had sleeping bags and warm blankets, plenty of water, plenty of fuel when you left, because you wanted to make sure you could get back. And now we just, it seems that we have become accepting, well, things are going to go up, so hopefully our income will, and we will. Well, that might be true for 30% of this country's population, but it sure as heck isn't true for the bottom 30 and 40%. I mean, when that segment of our population has to hold 2 jobs, sometimes I know families in Santa Fe on the south side where they hold 3 jobs just to put food on the table. And that's inexcusable as far as I'm concerned by our elected officials. I hear what our 2 senators and US representatives say, but I just don't see the urgency and pressure applied that I think we need to solve those problems, and specifically this energy thing. I mean, if this merger goes through, God help us.
Yeah,
Because he's going to be the only one who can.
that's right.
And so I will now get off my soapbox and parrot what Jim said. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I want to thank you for coming and for at least listening to me. And I will now be praying to give you the energy and the power to fight the good fight against what I now know is one of the worst plans ever forced upon the population of New Mexico and the western states. Because I remember talking, my brother lives in Houston. And as you know, was it 3 winters ago, they didn't have power. And he told me the biggest problem they had, that wind company had, is they had not pulled maintenance on those generators for 3 years. And their rationale was, well, we never had that. Anybody who knows anything about machinery knows that maintenance is the number one thing you do to that equipment after you purchase it. But they wanted to improve their bottom line. Well, we haven't had this problem, so we'll just skip maintenance. I don't know how those people in Texas are now going to vote, because this was a case where, the good PR says, oh, you'll have lower rates. Yeah, there's no problem. Well, they had lower rates. And then they went through 2 weeks when they didn't have power, they didn't have water, you couldn't get gasoline. I don't want to see that happen in New Mexico in my lifetime. Now, Jane and I are probably in a similar situation. We've had a lot of years behind us that we're going to have going forward. But, as adults, we have to think about making the types of decisions that may not necessarily benefit us now, but to benefit our children, our grandchildren, and great-grandchildren going forward. Because this is a great country. And as I say, I spent 21 years in the military trying to defend, willing to put my life on the line to defend what I believed about the greatness of this country. And I'm just hate what's happening now as a result of what one evil man could cause to this country. So in closing, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
I will now include you in my prayers to continue to give you the energy and the power to fight the good fight.
Thank you so much, and be well, all of you. And wow, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All of
Have a
Okay.
it.
great day, everybody.
You too.
You too.